welcome back to Wool Shift Dust, a Silo TV podcast. I'm Elysia.
And I'm Luke.
And we're inching closer and closer to the May 5th premiere. And more interviews and news items are getting released. Stuff we think you guys are going to want to know. So we're going to give you a few more things to look out for in the first season and beyond. Yes, beyond. Luke, what kind of Silo news have you been seeing?
Well, I've heard it described as a murder mystery in several interviews, which means somebody is going to get deaded. And that was not what I was expecting from the trailer. I've seen several interviews with Common that gives you a much better sort of sense of Sims and his motivation and where he fits into the hierarchy. The interviews have confirmed something I've been curious about since we started out, which is the total number of people in the silo. It's meant to be the last 10,000 members of humanity.
As far as I know, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting and might be something we want to get into later on in the podcast, because maybe later on in the series, because I'm not sure that 10,000 people is actually enough to maintain a breeding population over more than a couple of generations without it becoming sort of quite physically inbred. Yeah.
Right. And I think, the number of generations is a question also that's raised in the series. How long have they been in there? Now, they've talked about this briefly in some of the interviews, too, that it's been a few generations. But, yeah.
I think I saw in an interview with Rebecca Ferguson, she was saying she is the third generation that has been sort of raised in the silo.
Right. Okay. That's, she was specific then. Yep, you got her. But then, of course, and she raises the question, how did all this happen? And that's going to be a question that's going to be addressed much later in the series. All right, so we're going to be talking about all that in a moment. But first, before I bury the lead, the biggest news, two pieces of biggest news actually, is, well, first, it looks like the first season will actually only be covering about half of the first book, Wool. The book author, Hugh Howey, he said in an interview with SK Pop that the first season does not cover the whole first book, and book readers who look at the episode titles for the season will be able to figure out where this season is going to end in the story. But don't worry, because it's been unofficially confirmed by Variety and some casual mentions by cast members and interviews that the second season is already filming. So did you know about this, Luke? And what do you?
I did know that the second series had been greenlit, and I got the implication from a lot of the interviews that season one ends on something of a cliffhanger. And also like a number of people that have followed us, have followed the show on Twitter, hi guys, have also implied that it ends on like a really sort of shocking cliffhanger if it ends halfway through the first book.
How do you feel about that, splitting the first book in two?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, like you said in the last podcast, it sounds like quite a chunky doorstopper of a book. So I think it makes sense, particularly if you're spending the first couple of episodes introducing all the characters and introducing the world, the plot because there was also a very sort of cryptic review in a French magazine that a Twitter follower of ours sent, and Google Translate is a miracle. It's one of society's great inventions. That described it as a very contemplative series, which the authors seem to think was somehow a disadvantage. I think, great.
Yeah.
Super.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, one of the things I love about the series, there is this plot and this layering of mysteries. We're going to get into that, of course, but it is also about humanity and how humanity persists and how people deal with positions they're put in.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the several interviews I read with Common, aka Sims, he talks about Sims, being in a moral dilemma of he's carrying some kind of secret with him, but he thinks it's important to keep it secret for the good of the silo, the survival of the species. And Tim Robbins playing Bernard, actually, that was one of the most interesting interviews I read, because we've talked about this on the previous two podcasts. I didn't really know what Bernard's motivation was. And again, Tim Robbins was very much making the point that, from his point of view, he is the good guy, like you were saying in the last episode. Yeah. And again, there is sort of this sense that he's carrying this great secret. There is sort of a moral weight that he thinks he has to carry for the greater good of society.
Yeah, no, it was, so I think you're referring there to there was this great series of interviews by Bonnie Loffer. I think I'm going to pronounce her last name, by Bonnie Loffer.
The lady from Toronto.
Yeah, she posted them on her YouTube channel. She made a playlist there if anyone else wants to watch them all themselves. Warnings for both the interviews themselves and for our discussion of them here. There are going to be some minor world building details spoiled, but then again, we've already gotten into that. There's the one with Common where we talk about that. But the first interview, it's with Rebecca Ferguson, our Juliet. And she talks especially about taking on the executive producer role, which she says she saw as a great opportunity to learn more about that side of the business, with the key bonus that it would guarantee her more control over the character in production and make sure she felt good about the final product. Though she gives Graham Yost full credit for running the show and winning over the trust of the entire cast and crew. But everyone else interviewed absolutely gushed about the role she played on set. And in another interview with the YouTube channel Jake's Takes, she said she actually pushed back on the first draft of the script she saw when she was first offered the role. And they came back to her with changes and the producer role offer. They're like, okay, we'll let you have your input. So I'm definitely the type who likes to be able to control the details. So it's yet another reason why Rebecca Ferguson is so relatable. What do you think, Luke?
I mean, I don't really have anything to add, but I thought that was really interesting. The other thing she and several other actors talked about, it was the physicality of the entire series. So obviously we've seen from the two trailers that Juliet is involved in fight scenes, and obviously there's a lot of manhandling equipment because she works as an engineer. But also what I found really interesting, because it implies that they really did build a lot of the silo as a physical set, because several of them, mentioned how tiring it was to be constantly going up and down stairs. So it suggests that the physical set it's not obviously not going to be 144 levels, but it's probably split over, I don't know, maybe half a dozen different levels, and then we constantly we don't just see the characters in one room, hard cut, next room. You actually see them. It implies you actually see them move from location to location. And it reminded me of listening to Sigourney Weaver talk about Alien, because Ridley Scott had the Nostromo built as a single set.
Okay.
You didn't move between the rooms. All the rooms were actually connected by corridors. So when you saw them running from room to room, they were actually doing that. It was a single enclosed set. And it sounds like this is very much the same, same deal.
Yeah, they talked a lot throughout the interviews about, just the immersiveness of the set detail. And I thought that was I also read that there are 144 levels like the book, but each level might be multiple floors, and that they made sure each level was 30 feet or 9 meters tall. So I thought that was an interesting way to pack more in there, because I did say I got the idea from the trailer that it was even bigger than I thought. So we get more of that claustrophobia, more of that, it's got to be a society big enough to sustain life for multiple generations, as you say.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll get to this when we get the making of behind the scenes stuff, but I would be really interested to know where they actually filmed it, because there are only a couple of studios I can think of. Probably if they filmed it in the UK, it's almost certainly Pinewood, that are actually big enough, that are actually physically big enough to allow you to do that. And if they're doing that, that kind of implies that the series as a whole has a movie budget behind it. So again, we talked about this in the last podcast. Apple are making a serious investment. Investment in this series.
Yeah, I know they are filming in the UK, though. Yeah, you would know better about the studios there than I would.
Yeah, so Pinewood is where they did a lot of the Harry Potter movies. So you'd have the interiors for Hogwarts is what I'm thinking, which is about the sort of size you would need for what they're sort of. I'm just geeking out over production details.
I was just looking into it, and I can't find anything about Pinewood specifically. They said filmed in London, so
yeah, it would have been Pinewood then.
Yeah, probably. Okay, yeah we're definitely gonna. If anyone at home knows anything more about that, we'd love to hear all about the behind the scenes details. Yeah. So the next interview in that Bonnie Loffer playlist was actually an interview with a character we haven't discussed yet. So it's Chinaza Uche, who plays Paul Billings. Now I'm not really familiar with the actor's work yet, but I see he's been in a bunch of things I keep wanting to catch up on, like A Good Person, the movie, Dickinson, and Little America, the TV shows on Apple. So I wonder if he has an Apple contact. contract. Are you familiar with him at all, Luke?
No, I'm not. Like you say, I'm very much in the same boat as you, Elysia. It's stuff I want to watch, but I haven't got around to yet.
But yeah, the projects he's working on show promise. Yeah, he must be a quality actor. But the interesting thing is there is no Paul in the book. So I'm going to have to assume that the character he's playing is the character called Peter Billings in the book. He's called Paul Billings on the show, Peter Billings in the book. Interesting and specific choice to change like one biblical P name for another. And like with the change that's small and specific, I have to wonder if it does have anything to do with, why would you do it? Are there biblical implications? I'm not an expert in the Bible myself, but this is something I'm definitely going to be thinking about going in. And if we have any Bible experts listening, please do share any insight you might have. Luke, you're not a Bible scholar.
No, unfortunately not. But I know people that are, so maybe if it turns out to be relevant, we can get a guest on the podcast. But yeah, no, I have no idea why you would do that.
All right, yeah, if anyone has any other theories about the Peter to Paul change. But anyway, Peter, Paul, whatever your name is, he's a mid-silo resident. In the book, he's a mid-level bureaucrat in judicial. He's described as tall and imposing, and he has political leanings. In the interview, the interviewer who's seen the whole season says Paul is, quote unquote, going through a lot. And Uche describes Paul as someone who wholeheartedly believes in something and thinks of himself as a good person, even when that becomes less clear to others. What did you make of this, Luke? What role are you expecting him to play? And what do you think he wholeheartedly believes in?
I don't know what he wholeheartedly believes in. He was kind of insinuating, though, that at some point the Paul's character and Juliet are going to come into contact with each other. So I wonder whether he seemed to sort of again imply that he'd found something out, that he knew something that he'd rather not know.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I wonder whether he's going to be a step on Juliet finding out about, the wider sort of conspiracy that they seem to be setting up here.
Okay. Yeah. Fun fact we learned in the interview, his wife and kids in the series are played by his real life family.
I thought that was so adorable. I was like, oh, bless.
Including his twin infants, yeah. So that's going to add some extra depth while watching, I think, at least for me.
Yeah.
So next up, we meet another actor whose character we haven't discussed yet. We've had Harriet Walter, who plays Martha Walker. Now, I have to say I am very familiar with Harriet Walter's work. She's been in everything for decades, including Downton Abbey, Killing Eve, Ted Lasso, Succession. She popped up on Doctor Who, just to name like a paltry few. How familiar are you, Luke? Are you a fan?
A little bit. A little bit. I'm not that extensive. I've seen her in Succession. She's Logan Roy's ex-wife, and Kendall Roman and Shiv's
mother.
Mother, yeah. From the interview, are we meant to understand that she is the woman in the hospital bed that we saw in the second trailer? I don't know whether that was something I just read into it, or whether that's what we were meant to take away from what she was saying.
It doesn't look like her.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought.
What made you think that? Like
because she's talking about being sort of in the lower levels of the silo. She's talking about sort of being isolated.
But the lower levels of the silo, so the hospital would not be in the lower levels because it's not accessible. So the lower levels of the silo are mechanic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's sort of talking about that basically Juliet is the only person that takes any kind of interest in her, and that she's been sent to the lower levels for some sort of past infractions.
Well, I don't know about
behavior.
Yeah, she didn't say sent. She said how she ended up there.
Okay.
Yeah. But okay, so I was excited to see her pop up in the cast here, especially for this role, which does also have one change from the book. In the book, Walker is a man. He's someone who's been working in mechanical for decades and someone who Juliet looks up to. So in the books, he was sort of like a fatherly mentor to Juliet. And now we're getting like a motherly mentor instead. An article in SFX magazine we're going to discuss later said they wanted Juliet to have a mother figure in her life, though Walter said she and Ferguson were as much sisters as mother-daughter. And honestly, a female Walker works just fine for me. I think it might even add another layer to their interactions. What do you think, Luke? Are you bothered by gender swapping?
No, not particularly. I did just going back to the Tim Robbins interview for a second. It did kind of throw me that they kept constantly referring to him as Bernard from IT, and as an ex-Westworld, as a Westworld fan, I just hear Bernard from IT. That's Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah, I know.
That's going to take some getting used to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, did I read the books before I saw Westworld? I don't know. I need to look at the dates. But okay, so next up we had in the interview playlist was Avi Nash, who plays Lucas Kyle. Now, we already mentioned him in previous episodes after we got a glimpse of him in the teaser, standing in the cafeteria with Juliet looking at something. But the biggest take away from the interview that we saw in this series was that the character is very curious, he has heart and hope, and that Hugh Howey called this character in the books the closest stand-in for himself. What do you make of this, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I always find author self-inserts really interesting because it clearly tells you a lot about how the author would like themselves to be seen or what the author thinks are their sort of outstanding sort of character traits. So I think that's going to be interesting. I do wonder kind of what Lucas's relationship with Juliet is going to be because they didn't address it directly, but I got the sense that they were and you see this from the trailer as well, they were kind of talking around that there might be a kind of romantic entanglement there.
Okay.
For want of a better way to put it. So that's something I was interested in.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So the actor, Nash, he's best known for playing Sadiq in The Walking Dead. Now, that character didn't show up until season 8, which is basically when I stopped watching, but I did see his introduction. What about you, Luke? Are you a Walking Dead fan?
No, I tapped out of The Walking Dead really early on. Like, I stopped liking The Walking Dead before it was cool to stop liking The Walking Dead. So, no, I tapped out well before season 8.
I'm glad I watched as much as I did, but that I'm also not like regretting that I checked out. Yeah. But in any case, so I didn't see much of Sadiq. I think he's a different kind of character than Lucas. So it's my initial impression, anyway, of Sadiq. But what do you think of these 3 new characters in general, Luke? Do they change your expectations for the series?
No, they don't change my expectations, but I think it sort of opened up a wider world, and this is maybe not going to be a show that is like laser focused all the time on Juliet and Halston. There are this bigger cast of characters that they're going to interact with. I was kind of disappointed we didn't get an Ian Glenn interview because I'd have been interested to know more about his character.
I saw one interview with him, but it was mostly talking about another movie. I think it was like a German movie or something. But anyway, and he just briefly mentioned, he kind of confirmed that they're filming the 2nd season of Silo. So
okay, well, at least we know that character makes it as far as season 2. Which is something.
Okay, so yeah, but then toward the end of the interview set, we get Common, who plays Sims from IT. So we've already kind of talked about this character a lot before, and we talked a bit about this interview. But the part of the interview that jumped out to me was like where the interview asks if Sims is a bad guy, which is something we've been mulling over. And Common says he's a human being who cares for the well-being of the silo, cares for his family. He's doing his job. So that's basically what you were referring to earlier, right, Luke?
Yeah, it was sort of a very sort of nuanced answer, and it sort of goes back to the idea that the IT department is going to be the sort of principal antagonist here. And actually, I can't remember whether it was in this interview or one of the ones I read, but he was also making the point that the IT department is is the critical department within sort of the society of the silo. Sort of if the IT system fails for any reason, then the silo as an environment fails. And I guess that's because, you've got computers doing the environmental controls. But I think both Common and Tim Robbins made the point that puts a lot of pressure on their characters because they're like the single point of failure in the entire system for the silo, other departments like agriculture or they seem to be saying other departments.
I think the biggest, most devastating potential for failure would be Juliet's department, mechanical.
Okay.
Because then it's like the difference between, losing your internet and like losing your
electricity. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and also I hadn't seen Common interviewed very much about anything, and he's just an effortlessly charming, laid back guy. I could listen to him talk all day. He seemed, I think all of them seemed really enthused by this project. Now, I guess when you're giving those kind of interviews, you have to sound enthused by what you're doing.
But I think they sounded more excited than they needed to.
Yeah, I definitely got that impression. So I think they sounded like people who were pleased, proud of, understood that they'd done a good job putting the series together, which makes me look forward to next Friday even more, frankly.
Yeah, they seem excited to let people see what they've been up to. So, and it gives me, we haven't really seen the cast interact yet, but the way they speak about each other makes it seem like there's probably some good chemistry.
And yeah, like you said earlier, they all seem to, Rebecca Ferguson they all talk a lot about her sort of keeping morale up on set and sort of being sort of guiding the whole process, which is interesting because obviously, and Rebecca Ferguson talks about this in the interview, how she had to divide up time between the on-screen stuff and the off-screen stuff. And she's saying, she was doing a lot of training. She was working for a long time on getting Juliet's accent right.
Right. Right, because Rebecca Ferguson is Swedish.
Yeah. No. Which is interesting because are we kind of assuming that the Silo is a North American?
They speak with American accents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For whatever reason, they speak with American accents. Okay. For this Bonnie Lawfer series, we end on an interview with showrunner Graham Yost and book author Hugh Howey together. And I like how Yost described what drew him to the story. He said, "It's a big, big mystery that you peel back one layer at a time. And each time you get an answer, you get 3 more questions." I also found it interesting when Howey said he said we're trained to stop believing the news when all we get is bad news. Do you think that's true, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of took that from the point of view of, if you're only exposed to one point of view, if you do that long enough, you stop listening to alternatives, you stop looking for alternative explanations. I've got to say the Graham Yost line about we answer one question and it creates 3 more. I've got to say that made me a little bit nervous because.
Really? Okay.
Because way back in the day, as I was starting out on my, nerdish journey of discovery, I was a huge fan of Lost. Huge fan of Lost. And that had very much the same sort of thing. And it's okay answering one question and creating 3 more to begin with. But at some point, if the series as a whole is going to be satisfying, you need to actually be able to provide satisfying answers to all those questions. Otherwise, you get, I don't know about you, but I don't like series that end with, you got to fill in the blanks, you got to tie it up in your own head. It's like, no, that's just bad writing. You are in charge of the series, and I want it to finish in a way that is, I'm not saying you have to answer every single question, but I want it to finish in a way that's satisfying. I don't want it to leave a lot of loose ends.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just me, but I prefer shows that at the end, have answered most of the questions they set out with.
Right. I mean, in the May issue of SFX magazine, it was reassuring to see in that article that at the end, Yost is quoted as saying he has roughly 4 seasons in mind for telling the story of 3 books. So I guess that would be then the first book in 2 seasons and the next books in 1 season each. Or maybe they'll start filtering in some of the prequel stuff next season. It's hard to say now. But he said even though some of the writers, quote unquote, joke about going on beyond that, Yost seems to agree that it's important a mystery have an ending. So I personally found that reassuring.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think from reading interviews with Hugh Howey, even though there is the possibility of a 4th book, it doesn't sound like we're in a Game of Thrones situation where if you don't get the next 2 books, the story won't have completed. He feels like he's got potential for a 4th book, but if it ended up that it was just a 3-book series, they would have brought it to, in his mind, a satisfying endpoint.
Yeah, no, the 3rd book definitely comes to a satisfying endpoint, but also definitely, there's an intriguing story to be told beyond that. So either way, we should be good. Yeah, so some of the other points from that SFX article is, they revealed some plot details I won't get too into for spoiler reasons. But as you brought up earlier, it sounds like they're taking an element from Juliet's backstory and bringing it to the front so that we open with her looking into a death in the silo. Apparently that's going to be a major story driving her character throughout the season, which I'm thinking, that's a way to introduce her earlier because like I said in the book, she's not one of the first characters you meet. You don't meet her for a while. So I'm guessing this might, So
in the book, this idea of a murder mystery is sort of downplayed, is not so much of a major plot point?
It's more, exactly. Yep, that's how, and it's something that you don't really get to find out much about until you get to know Juliet. So
okay.
Yeah, it sounds like they're pulling it forward. What do you think about that setup? Are you intrigued by that storyline?
I mean, yeah, the idea, I think it's probably a good idea to have like an inciting event to make that would motivate Juliet to look deeper into the mystery of what's going on in the silo, who built it, and why. I think to have a personal angle to that rather than just, waking up one morning and being overly curious makes sense.
Right.
I mean, when I was reading one of the reviews, it didn't flat out say this, but it kind of implied that the person who was killed is a member of Juliet's family.
Well, no. Yeah. So she maybe has lost a couple people in her life.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there and move on.
So the article also teases a lot of the specific rules of the world, which would seem a bit odd to us outsiders. Like, for example, why has nobody built an elevator in this silo? They have the technology, they have electricity and machinery. But yeah, these are things that we'll dig into more as the episodes start airing.
I did think one of the rules that was interesting and that made a lot of sense is that it has very strict population control. So people have to apply to the authorities to have for permission to have children.
Yeah,
which makes sense because you've got a limited amount of space.
Yeah, we alluded to that in the first episode that we did, but they'll get more into the roles. But indeed, one of the things is a birthing lottery. You have to get assigned like a window in which you can try to have a baby. In the book, that's 1 year. And then if you don't, then tough luck. Next person's term.
Ooh, harsh.
Yeah.
Really harsh.
Yeah. So they talked also in the articles, also in the interviews, video interviews, they talked more about the immersive detail of the set. So it really makes me hope that one day they'll open the set for tours or something.
Yeah. Well, if they do, you have to pop over to London and I'll have to pop down from Scotland and we can do a vlog or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it also makes me excited just imagining like how immersive that must have been for them. Like they talked, a lot of them, all of the cast members, about how difficult it is to imagine, growing up in a world where you're never step foot outside. Although, who was it? I think Avinash was maybe the one who was like, it would be like imagining living in the sky, and we don't live in the sky. We can't imagine it, and that's what it's like being in the silo and outside the silo, which I thought was a cool way to put it. Luke, have you imagined growing up in the silo?
No, but not before I watched these interviews. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of thought experiment of, what would you do if you couldn't go outside? For the interviews we're talking about, the host kept sort of trying to draw parallels with COVID and lockdown. And, those parallels only go so far because, of course, you could go outside during lockdown. So I think it's interesting that it's coming out now. And I wonder if it's been rewritten to sort of reflect on the experience of COVID at all. I kind of hope that it hasn't.
I hope not. I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah. So, like I said, I read a French review that one of our Twitter followers was kind enough to point our way. And it sort of talked about the show really taking its time to build the world. And, it goes into some detail about how the society functions. And it seemed like you actually spend a couple of episodes just sort of wandering around the silo and getting acquainted with the world before the plot even really kicks in. Which is fine by me. But I would love that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the first things that they need to do but I do think in the book they manage to do both at the same time, where they use the plot to drive the exposition of the world building. So I'm hoping and assuming it's going to be the same in the show. Okay.
Yeah. And so beyond what we've already been discussing, the reviews are beginning to roll in from both a screening they had of the first episode at the Cannes Series Festival in France, and also from people like Bonnie Loffer we already discussed, and other people have been able to watch the entire season. And the reviews so far that I've seen are all glowing. Luke, what about you? Where's your hype level at now?
My hype level is fairly high. I actually sort of, in preparation for this podcast, I did sort of try to look to see if there were were more reviews than the one from that festival you just mentioned. But I couldn't really find any full-blown reviews. There's a lot of hints and winks and nods. So, I mean, actually, this is not unusual. But, like, I think the production team are doing quite a good job of keeping things under wraps before the first 2 episodes drop. On Friday, in less than a week now, we're recording this on April 23rd. So, yeah, I'm hyped.
I mean, I would say I'm at maximum hype. So it's good to hear excitement from someone who hasn't read the books as well. And so, Luke, any other last thoughts or theories before we go?
Any other last thoughts? Like I say, I'd like to know more about Ian Glenn's character. Mm-hmm. I couldn't really find any interviews with him about this. I think this is something we can come back to in later podcasts. But I think the fact that the total population of the silo is 10,000 is interesting, because I wonder if that has something to do with the secret that Bernard and Sims are keeping, and whether there is a clock on the survivability of the silo as a society.
Okay, yeah.
So I may be totally wrong there, but no. I thought 10,000 was an interesting number, because I don't know much about genetics. I seem to remember years ago when I was on the forums for the remake of Battlestar Galactica, somebody pointed out that the idea of having like 40,000 survivors was actually quite clever, because that is the minimum number of people you would need for sort of healthy breeding stock.
Okay.
Long term. Now, I don't know whether that person knew what they were talking about. It sounded convincing when I was reading the message board back in the day, and it always sort of stuck with me as an interesting number. So I think the fact that the population is below that might be interesting.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely something else to track. I will say that the people who designed this silo did think through a lot of the logistics. So I can't wait to see all of that come to life on screen, and also, what they might tweak and change with what we know from the book. Now, before we go, credit again to Silo TV fans, aka at Silo17 Squad on Twitter, the best Silo account on Twitter, definitely. Thank you for bringing many of these interviews and news items to our attention, and also Rebecca Ferguson Webb at our Ferguson Webb on Twitter as well. And as for us, I'm Alicia Brenner, and you can find me on Twitter at AliciaCB, and popping up to talk Star Wars, Marvel, and other geekery on podcasts like The Lorehounds and Nom Talk Network. And Luke?
I'm Luke Middip, and you can find me on Twitter at Luke Middip.
And thank you for joining us for We'll Shift Dust, a Silo TV podcast. We'll be back in your ears Monday, May 8th to break down the first 2 episodes premiering on Apple TV Plus May 5th, to talk non-spoiler book changes and check in on Luke's Theory Crafting Corner. Now, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss it. And if you've enjoyed this episode, a 5-star rating on your podcasting platform of choice will really help us stand out among all the podcasts called Silo that aren't related to this TV show. Until May 5th, when we'll be waiting to talk it through like your motherly mentors down in Mechanical. Bye. Fake out ending. Basically,
dun, dun, dun.
Basically, since we recorded the first bit you just listened to, and between that and me finishing the editing, a new trailer has dropped. And we've got the 3rd official trailer from Apple, which is interspersed with some interviews with stars. And Luke, there was an extended trailer cut together by the site moviegasm.com with some new footage you wanted to talk about too, right?
Yeah, it's the second trailer, but just with a little bit with Holston walking through the silo, walking through the silo at night, walking through what I assume is the cafeteria to a room marked holding 3.
Yeah, so that comes from a video that trailer was released by Apple TV on Twitter, and we got an extended view in there of Holston indeed walking through like the stairwell and the cafeteria and what I assume is his office, and then we see also the holding cells, which there's like multiple in this video, but in the book they only refer to one. But I guess 10,000 people makes sense. There's multiple, right?
Yeah, you would think so. By the way, I did the maths on this because I was curious. 10,000 people divided by 144 levels is 64.7 people per level.
Okay.
So I'm assuming.
But remember that they also said that the levels are divided into like different, or the stories are divided into different levels or whatever. Anyway, there's several stories within a level.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm assuming as well, like the hydroponics, the agricultural levels and the mechanical levels would not have people living in them, and that they would take up more space. So I'm assuming the actual like density of population is a lot higher than that, because you would have certain levels where people wouldn't actually be living.
Yeah, I mean, I would say most levels do have residents. But
anyway, I was just curious. So I sat down and did the maths.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, indeed. Well, we're going to see what it looks like. I can't wait. I've been reading a lot of the reviews, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, yeah, so that was the extended video on Apple, and we're going to get into the other trailer briefly. But before that, I just wanted to make a quick correction. In a previous trailer, I speculated on who the actress was who was like huddled up with the Deputy Marnes watching the cleaning, and I speculated incorrectly. The actress we see there is actually Geraldine James, who plays Mary Jeans, Jahns. We'll see how they pronounce it in the show. Johns, maybe, which makes a lot of sense anyway, that we see her with the deputy watching the cleaning. And I also noticed in my latest rewatches of the previous trailers that it's actually John and Marnes we see at one point visiting babies in the shot of the nursery we get in the last trailer. So nothing surprising there, but those are scenes we can look forward to seeing play out. And we also got a bit of fun news. The Silo book series, as in like the physical books themselves, or at least like nanofiche of them, is going to the moon. They're going to be included in the Lunar Codex Polaris time capsule, which will be launching on a SpaceX Falcon Heavy as part of like the November 2024 Astrobiotic Griffin NASA Viper mission, which is going to be targeting the lunar South Pole. And the Lunar Codex is an ongoing mission to create an archive of books and art and other media, I guess in case we blow ourselves up or, whatever we do. Luke, if you could send reading material to the Martians, would it be dystopian science fiction?
Well, yeah, apart from the literary tour de force that is the Powell Doctrine in U.S. foreign policy, available at all good bookshops and stockists. Just for context, sorry, that was the book I wrote, the first book I wrote. So I'm just a little bit worried that if we send dystopian science fiction and aliens pick that up, are they going to assume that's how we wipe ourselves out? Yeah, it could be very confusing for the aliens involved.
I mean, I'm not going to spoil anything about the endgame of this story, but Tim Robbins keeps going around in interviews talking about how this is a warning for us. So
yeah, I've watched several interviews with Tim Robbins, and he is walking a fine line to major spoilers. Also, his views on the COVID lockdown. I'm not going to go into this except to say, yikes.
What did he say about COVID lockdown? Remind me.
Basically that this was, I think it was on an interview he did with Screen Rant, basically saying, the lockdown was a mistake. It was kind of, we shouldn't have done it.
Oh, okay. I didn't read that into it. Okay.
Yeah. So, just not going to go into the politics of
lockdown. Yeah.
Tim Robbins.
Oh, all right. Yeah, well, that's something to keep an eye on. But it's interesting, how much the COVID and the lockdown comes up when talking about this series. And of course, this whole series was written before that. But I guess that's like the nearest approximation we've gotten as to what it would be like to grow up in a silo. Yeah.
Also, Tim Robbins said something else in that interview about the silo existing for 300 years. Which is much longer than
3 generations.
Yeah, which is much longer than 3 generations. So clearly the silo seems to have existed for longer than some of the characters are aware of. And it took, because there's sort of talk of a relic. So clearly the true history of the silo and possibly why it exists is being suppressed or being rewritten.
This is very plausible. I was going to talk about the relics indeed, that they mention in the trailer we're about to talk about, that there are these illegal relics from the before times, and we'll see what that means. But so in the trailer, I'm not going to repeat the stuff that's basically extended versions of what we've already seen, but we do get a much better look at the stairwell, which looks pretty awesome. Someone who worked as an extra on the set was talking about it on the official Silo series fan group on Facebook, and they said basically it's every bit as cool as it looks on screen. And Rebecca Ferguson, aka Juliet, she confirms that we're talking about 10,000 people across 144 quote unquote floors. So if you listen to the last episode, you know what we mean by that. We talked about it a little bit here. And she also says something new. She says there is a threat outside and we don't know what that threat is. And the characters ask the dangerous question of why. Luke, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really tell us much that we don't know by the previous trailers.
Okay.
I did think this just sort of reinforces the idea that what happened to the outside is completely unknown to, shall we say, the vast majority of people in the silo, possibly everybody in the silo. And you know, obviously, if people die every time they go out for a cleaning to clean the windows so people can see outside, obviously whatever happened is incredibly serious. But I do sort of think that the one thing that little snippet of interview confirmed was that like I say, the vast majority or possibly all of the people in the silo don't know what happened to the outside world, really don't have the first clue what happened.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Morton Tilden, the director, he does call the show a mystery at its core. And he says it, quote, deals with what the truth is, who owns the truth, and who's telling the truth. Does that make your political senses tingle?
It does. Another thing that makes my political senses tingle is I was watching an interview with Graham Yost and Hugh Howey, and Graham Yost compared it to All the President's Men in terms of it unfolds quite slowly and it's mysteries within mysteries. So, a sci-fi version of All the President's Men, I'm definitely down for that.
Yeah, okay. Ferguson and Graham Yost, the showrunner, described Juliet as driven to be constantly seeking the truth. Does that mesh with what you're expecting from her?
Yeah.
I actually don't know if that's how I described Juliet at the start of the books, though it's definitely what she becomes. At the start, though, it feels like she's kind of like hiding in the basement. But it seems in the show they're giving her more agency from the get-go and playing up that mysterious death element we've discussed before, which I don't mind at all. Like, you've already got Walker, her mentor, playing the quote-unquote hiding in the basement role. But I do wonder if this could be what Rebecca Ferguson talked about changing when she got the original script before accepting the job. What do you think?
I just wonder whether that's like a TV thing of basically making the plot start a little bit quicker. Because you know, you can read 150 pages into a book and it's just world building and scene setting. But with TV, you have less time. It's not designed to be sort of put down and come back to. So TV, rather like movies, you have to start the plot a little bit sooner. You have to engage the audience a bit quicker. And I wonder if sort of giving Juliet more agency is A, to make her character and her motivation a little easier for us, a novice audience, to follow, but B, just as a way of making things move a little bit quicker.
Yeah. Well, one thing I found out from reading a lot of the reviews is that actually we shouldn't expect Juliet to show up until episode 2, which is still, relatively fast. But I thought she might show up earlier just because TV, but it makes sense with the books that they give the first part of the story a chance to shine. Do you mind, Luke, if the star doesn't show up until the second episode?
No, it's not like from the trailers and what have you that we don't know that Rebecca Ferguson is in this show. So it's not as though they buried the lead. So yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I'm just trying to think, are there any other examples of like the main character not showing up till a couple of episodes in?
I feel like a similar example would be, for instance, the Sandman series that came out on Netflix this year.
I still haven't seen that.
It's not that the main character doesn't show up, but he's basically, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's basically immediately sidelined for a while.
Okay.
And he definitely shares the spotlight. And I hear also a lot from the interviews, this is very much an ensemble story, which is true of the books, but it sounds like they might have even beef that up a little more.
Yeah, did you see it's only like a 1-minute scene that Rotten Tomatoes put out with Rashida Jones in what I assume to be IT, looking at some drive that they, Yeah. We'll get to that in a bit if you're going through this chronology.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to bring it up because we saw bits of that in previous trailers, but now indeed this time we saw them actually looking at files, which is, we just basically see nested files unless you picked up anything from it.
Well, no, except that the thing that I found interesting was that there's a sort of before and after times within the silo, that there was some sort of rebellion, some sort of uprising, and exactly what happened there and exactly what caused it and what the results of that are. There seems to be some conscious effort on the part of the authorities to rewrite or suppress history.
Yes. I mean, there's certainly, they refer to a rebellion. And we hear a lot in these interviews and the teases we get in the trailers that this story is a question of the truth. And as Tim Robbins said, who controls the truth? Or did Common say that? Sorry.
I think they both say it. Some version.
Yeah, so indeed, I can say you're pushing in the right direction. There's the questions of
also
what's reality.
Also, it's entirely natural, but I did like the use of clean as a verb. Yeah, it's entirely natural that would happen, but I just thought that was cool. And I don't know who the actor is, but the look on his face when Rashida Jones's character says that and the way he reacts to it, it's really well done, because you get a sense of the horror of what that means. Which is, a slow, unpleasant death.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, all they know is when people go outside, they're gone. They're dead to the silo.
Yeah.
And so also what Juliet says later about digging into the truth, creating a domino effect, that certainly tracks. And then we get our mystery hospital woman again. I tried to do face and voice side by side, and I don't think it's Mare Johns, but apparently face matching at least isn't my strongest forte. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the episode.
Is that a new character for the TV show then?
No, Mare Johns? No.
The woman in the hospital.
I mean, I haven't been able to ID who it is. So
okay, but there's not somebody in the book that you go, oh, that's the woman in the hospital.
Well, you already know. I mean, there's an important character named Dr. Nichols, and certainly you see him treat patients. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, she says they want to erase the past and anyone who tries to preserve it. How does that fit into your theory crafting corner?
What sort of strikes me here is this is, if you want a real world, sort of analogy to this, is very much what the CCP, the Communist Party of China, do in regards to the events of Tiananmen Square in 1989. Okay. And that sort of very, very systematic effort to sort of block all knowledge in mainland China of what happened, and of what happened and why it happened. And obviously the silo on its face should be an environment where it's much easier to control information, to fewer people, smaller space, and it's a closed ecosystem as far as information goes. As far as we know, there is no other silo, no other country, no other people to interact with. So it's much more of a closed system than you would ever find in the real world. I think if they're making a point about the sheer difficulty of erasing the past, that's going to be really interesting.
Okay, noted. Quick aside, I love that we get Halston looking puzzled over a Pez dispenser when they talk about illegal relics of the past. Just imagine like a Pez dispenser out of context would trigger many questions.
Yeah. You know what that face is? That face is the Bernard from Westworld face. It's the it's the I had my keys this morning and I can't find them.
Yeah, it's interesting that I've been picking up from reading, these reviews and listening to the interviews is that Common, for instance, he refers to his character. I called him the head of IT security because that's his title in the books. But he calls himself the head of judicial security. And judicial in the books is just kind of like you get a throwaway reference when talking about Peter, now Paul Billings. And now it seems like in the interviews, it seems to play a bigger role in this series where, it's not just about our protagonists versus IT, but also judicials in the mix. I have some theories about, why they're doing that and where that might lead.
I mean, if it's judicial security, that presumably means that he's going to have quite a significant relationship with Halston as the sheriff, because you've sort of got the two sides of law enforcement there, the sort of coercive police power and the judicial power. So that kind of, I would assume, sets up quite a close relationship with Halston.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's other, I think that, yeah, we'll see other connections play out a little bit differently too. And also maybe like the power dynamic within the silo slightly, maybe more triangulated. I don't know. We'll
Yeah,
see.
maybe.
And I'd like to point out later in the trailer, Common also says the wool is being pulled over the people's eyes, which is what I said in the first episode was in addition to the wool they use for the cleanings, I thought that this idiom was a source of the first book in the Silo series title.
Yeah, when he said that, I just imagined Elysia and Leo pointing.
I'm definitely taking it as confirmation.
Yeah.
That's fact. Hashtag fact. Yeah. One other thing we get in the trailer is Holston and Juliet exploring somewhere deep down. He asks what this place is, and Juliet theorizes it's from before the rebellion. And then they cut to a giant machine in a pit, which we've seen glimpses of before, and Juliet says, "This makes me realize how little we know about the silo," and Holston looks around baffled. Luke, what do you think this place is?
Yeah, so I took it from that there was a point in the past where the silo was much bigger than it is in the present day.
Okay.
So I took that to be maybe what we're seeing in the silo now is the upper half or the upper quarter of what used to exist.
Yeah.
And my complete guess is that the rebellion was in that lower part of the silo, and sort of the punishment when that rebellion was defeated was to have that part of the silo sort of locked off, walled off, a little bit like what happens in Kansas City in The Last of Us, where they sort of bury the infected underground. That was kind of my read of that.
Okay. And beyond that, we get more shots of the themes we've seen before: conflict, Juliet in the water, someone going outside in the cleaning suit, etc. And then beyond the trailers, with review embargo up, as I've said, we've gotten a lot of review drops, pretty much universally positive, with people calling it quote unquote wildly unpredictable, which ironically is exactly what I predicted. Though some people don't have patience for the political side of things in the middle, it seems. I'm hoping that tracks with the books, which would mean there's like a nice balance between the action and the intrigue. Now, curiously, a lot of reviewers are saying this is really for hard sci-fi fans, where I generally think of it more as like a political thriller with sci-fi elements. Luke, does this hard sci-fi label, does that affect your expectations at all? What would you consider?
I think what people can mean by hard sci-fi is very much sort of open to personal interpretation. So, the way I understand the term hard sci-fi is that there is an explanation of how things work. So the distinction I always come back to is the ships in Battlestar Galactica can travel faster than light, but it's never explained. Whereas you can literally go out and look at a design schematic of the Starship Enterprise. So it tries to explain how things in the world work rather than just asking the audience to take on faith that it does work. I enjoy hard sci-fi. I enjoy the softer sci-fi. I think so long as you set out in the first episode what the rules of engagement are for the audience, and as long as you stick to those rules of engagement, looking at you, Star Trek Picard,
called out.
Yeah, I don't think there's an issue. So, that's my understanding of the difference between hard and soft sci-fi. But it seems to mean different things to different people, to be honest.
Yeah, I also get a sense that the reviews that are saying this are coming from people who are like less interested in genre fiction in general. Like they're complaining about things like the silo having its own lingo, like the up top and the down deep to talk about the different sections of the silo. What's your professional opinion, Luke? Is it silly or realistic that they develop?
If you're going to have a society that has existed for, well, let's just say multiple generations, because there seems to be some dispute about how old the silo actually is, then of course it's going to develop its own language, its own social mores, its own way of describing things. So that to me, I think that's a really good sign, because I think it means that the writers have actually thought about in some detail what living in this environment would do to people, do to people's perceptions of the world and perceptions of each other. And as long as it's not too much of it, and as long as it's easy to follow what was said in context, I have no problem.
Yeah, but genre fiction fans seem to especially love the show. I have to shout out Jonathan It's Conan on Twitter, who's seen the whole series, and after tweeting out that Silo was, quote, one of the best sci-fi series since The Expanse and the closest thing to a universal crowd pleaser since Lost, he told me that as soon as he finished the show, he ran out, bought the books, read them, and then rewatched the series again.
Okay.
And then he said, and I quote, the series captures the sense of wonder the books have, and the changes never feel excessive. On a narrative level, it's up there with The Lord of the Rings in terms of how to adapt material with grace. So
I mean that is high praise. That is high praise indeed.
Yeah,
and that is setting the bar really high.
Yeah, I'm trying not to get overhyped, but it's hard. So where were we? Yeah. So there was also an interview with Tim Robbins on You Interview, the channel on YouTube, where he talks about the responsibility of being the head of IT, running the computer systems that will help keep the whole silo running. And he says he's always been curious about people in positions of power who have to make decisions, air quotes, for the greater good that may compromise their own morals. And how long someone can keep that up before getting caught and what that does to their soul. Robin says he doesn't know if that makes Bernard a good guy or a bad guy, but he loves the challenge of the character's complexities. Now, Luke, you've had strong opinions about your perceptions of this character so far. So temperature check. How are you feeling about Bernard?
I mean, I'm feeling a little bit better about him now that I've heard those interviews with Tim Robbins.
Mm-hmm.
There is still, like, just the way he delivers lines, you know, it makes your spidey senses tingle. That this is a bad guy, this is an antagonist. But I think that has probably something to do with putting the trailers together and wanting to let a potential audience know a little bit about the world in a short space of time. So I guess you can't be that subtle when you're putting trailers together. So it's probably sort of picking the moments that most clearly communicates what you want the audience to know about that character.
All right. There are other interviews with other cast members out there for anyone who wants more. I especially recommend looking up the Jonathan Bloomberg interviews with the creators and a few cast members on YouTube. There you'll hear some more production details, like how Pippa Broadhurst, who handled a lot of the visual production details, wrote 20 pages of the Pact, which is that system of rules you asked about before, Luke. So she wrote like the first 20 pages so that any one time they use it as a prop on set, you would open it and you can read it, and it actually said something meaningful.
I'm sort of starting to think whether over the course of the entire series, whether these will be like the Ferengi rules of acquisition, where they just kept adding more and more of them as Deep Space Nine went along. And like you can go on YouTube and see like the supercuts of like the 109 rules of acquisition that they quote throughout the series. I mean, the Pact thing is interesting, and like you hear Holston and you hear Bernard give. I think we mentioned this earlier in the episode, or possibly in the previous episode. You hear them give that same speech about, you know, we don't know who built the silo or why. We only know that here is safe, kind of thing. And the more I sort of look at the trailers, the more that sort of strikes me as like a mantra or a sort of a prayer almost.
Well, they do repeat it in every trailer, which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another thing from one of the interviews is Common. He said something interesting at the premiere in an interview on the Screen Slam channel, that this is a society that has no use for racism or sexism, but classism runs rampant. Is that what you would expect from a historical political perspective? Or what do you think classism looks like in this world?
Well, I mean, I think that's interesting because, you know, all societies under pressure, and I'm thinking principally war here, but all societies under pressure. I think Mark Galliotti, I was listening to his podcast on Russia and Ukraine the other day, which is a very good podcast. And he says, he described it as all societies in war become authoritarian socialism. And, you know, that is very, very true. So I'm not sure that classism is the right way to put it. It reminds me more of the nomenclatura system in the Soviet Union, where you had like a very defined set of privileges for people based on their role within society.
But isn't that classism?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that's classism, It's only classism if that is inherited, if that role in society is passed down from one generation to the next. That's my understanding of it anyway. So that it becomes ingrained. It's not based on performance of a specific task.
But don't you think, okay, so for instance, classism, yes, there's going to be a difference between, like in England, obviously this comes up a lot, the old money versus the nouveau riche, but still the nouveau riche can achieve a new class within one generation, right?
But yeah, I suppose that's true. Like I say, the historical parallel that struck me most firmly was the nomenclatura system in the Soviet Union, where you had basically the senior officials in the Communist Party and sort of industry got access to a much better standard of living than the ordinary working class, ironically, in a society that was, sold. Right. On the basis of being classless. And I think you sort of see that a little bit in Silo. There is kind of a sense of, listening to Holston, listening to Bernard, that this is supposed to be an egalitarian society, and it's supposed to be a society where everybody has their defined role and their defined responsibility. But actually, what you find out is that certain people doing certain jobs have access to privileges that other people don't.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good parallel. I also think about from, a psychological perspective, just how humans are always looking for the in-group and the out-group. And so, yeah, maybe you have no use for racism or sexism, but you're still looking for who do I blame for the things that go wrong in my life?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing to say about that is I wonder whether, then this may be getting a little bit too abstract, but I wonder whether you would have like a whole new set of cleavages opening up. I'm thinking particularly about the people who are allowed to have children and the people that aren't, and also presumably you'd have issues with the people that worked in agriculture would have better access to food than people that didn't, simply because they had the ability to filch it. So right. I wonder whether you're going to get a lot of antagonism between people on different levels because those people will have differential access to certain resources.
That's some good wondering there.
Okay.
Okay, so a headliner Chicago on YouTube had another great interview, this time with Chinaza Uche, who plays Paul Billings. And I know you and I both watched this. And yeah, he talks about Common just breaking out into freestyle on set, which sounds awesome. But also how Juliet challenges some of his ideas on the show. Luke, where are you expecting this Paul character to fall on like the Bernard to Juliet spectrum? Like where do you think?
TM. I think that's got to be once we actually start.
We've already established there's animosity between the two of them. Do you think? Do you think he's allied with one or the other, or that he's like a neutral third party, or somewhere in the middle?
I really don't know. I think that's going to be something we're going to have to find out by actually watching the series. But I think when we do start watching the series, I think that's got to be a weekly feature as new characters are introduced. We've got the Bernard Juliet scale. Yeah. Where does everybody fit on that scale?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to evaluate people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Uche also talks about them digging into the details not explored in the books, which is exciting. And also how the set had like fully working everything, including working showers in the apartments. So the attention to detail sounds insane. And of course, Rebecca Ferguson, she continues to be a star in all of the interviews with everybody gushing about her, talking about how real she is and how she's always like ribbing everyone on set. And when she herself gushes about like the importance of lifelong learning, it's hard not to have a crush. I don't know. What about you? Do you have
ever? The one thing I haven't seen and talked about a lot, and maybe you've seen this, is I wonder how she because I have the same issue with Pedro Pascal at the moment. How do they fit all this in between this and Dune? Because I can't imagine that Dune Part 2 is, is a picnic to film. I just, like, with Rebecca Ferguson, Pedro Pascal, where do they have time to eat and sleep and, just be in the world?
I mean, all I can say is long production schedules, but I do also know that some Mission Impossible fans are a bit nervous about her character's future in that franchise. So,
I'd forgotten about that as well. Yeah. It's like, seriously, where do you find the time?
All the reviews say she's going to be even more in demand after this. So, well, good for her. Good for her. She'll sleep when she dies, I guess. But anyway, yeah, anyone who wants to dive more into these interviews and reviews, I again recommend digging into the official Silo series fan group on Facebook and the Silo TV fans account on Twitter. But do be careful. Some of the reviews have spoilers. As for us, we'll be fading from your ears like illegal relics from the past from the Silo history books.
Nice. Nice.
But May 5th is coming soon, and we'll see you on the other side. We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions about the first 2 episodes. Please leave your comments on this episode on the website silotvpodcast.podbean.com or get in touch on Twitter at ElysiaCB or
just Luke Middup, all capital letters.
Please get your comments in before Sunday the 7th to be included in the recording. Until then,
we have a Discord.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the Lorehounds podcast, which I definitely recommend to everyone who likes to get in deep with geek television. I also appear on there, as I've mentioned before, in several episodes. But they've been kind enough to give us our own channel on their Discord. So I will be putting that in the show notes so that you can join us there and talk about Silo and also, jump into all the other conversations about Star Wars and the MCU and Ted Lasso and all the other different things. But until next week.
When we actually have the first 2 episodes to review.
We will
excited.
We will actually be seeing Inside the Silo. Until then, bye.
Bye.
Today, we discuss Miro. Listen, when it comes to running client workshops, the dream, of course, is to get those creative juices flowing, right? But typically what ends up happening is thousands of hours get wasted because of poorly facilitated meetings. So I have Maya with me today. She's a consultant who runs Fortune 100 workshops, from leadership training to team building, and she has the insider tip on what makes things work. Maya?
Thank you, Jason. I've been doing this a long time. My number 1 tip is to bring everyone into that visual collaboration platform. So personally, I use Miro, and it's completely changed how I interact with the room. You have to give people a way to feel like they're in the room even when they're not. That's something you can do easily in Miro. Otherwise, they've seen the same slides and format 1,000 times.
Falling asleep, eyes glazing over, yawns, all that.
Exactly. When people follow me on the Miro board, everyone is literally going on a journey with me. We're adding thoughts, we're reacting, and we're voting for the best ideas. It's great.
Connective magic. I like it. That's MIRO.com.